I'm Heather Ballas with the Election Reformers Network. We just want to thank you so much for making time in your busy schedules to join us for this national launch of the Election Overtime Project. That's a collection of legal and policy tools to support journalists, specifically in covering close, contested, and disputed elections. I would like to welcome Jason Carter to join our conversation as co-chair of the Carter Center. Jason is also a former Georgia state senator, candidate for governor, and as the grandson of President Jimmy Carter, comes from a family with a history of service to our nation and service across the globe to sound and trusted elections. So Jason, what do you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. I greatly appreciate being able to be here. And the Carter Center over the last 4 decades really pioneered and then has executed election observation missions over 110 different elections in over 40 countries. And so we've done a lot of this internationally and looked at situations that run the gamut from very significant political violence situations. For example, in Liberia, and when I was there in 1997, it was literally at the end, unfortunately, in the middle of a civil war, but there was an election there among, frankly, actual warring parties. That was a part of a peace process. We've seen elections, again, in a variety of different contexts, but what we have seen is we have seen also when the press works. And when talking about the elections in advance really helps to drive home and educate people about how this operates and dramatically reduces the risks of political violence and increases the ability for everyone to sort of respect those outcomes. And that overtime period, to Kevin's point, although sitting here in Atlanta, it was a remarkably painful analogy to see, having lived through that particular Super Bowl. But it is real. And I think that as we talk about these issues, just to give a quick example, in 2020, I led the mission, the Carter Center's mission to observe the election in Guyana, which is, as many of you know, a small country in South America that exploded onto the international scene because for about a 4-year period, it led the world in new oil and gas finds. And so this election was incredibly consequential for the people participating, incredibly polarized electorate, and it ended up taking months and months and months for that result to be properly counted, certified, and have credibility. And during that process, there was a remarkable set of patience, a remarkable reservoir of patience, and frankly, faith in that rule of law that Ben Ginsburg is going to talk about when I'm finished, as understanding and believing that these separate institutions have legitimacy. So one of the things that we've done as we've looked internationally and then turned toward the US in the last several years is begin to talk about what are these principles that underlie trusted elections? What are the fundamental small d democratic principles that give people faith in the system? And so we've put them here and we have put them out as candidate principles and others, but you can see that you're talking about an honest process where people are telling the truth. Obviously, the media is a fundamental part of making sure that occurs. The nonviolent campaign is straightforward, but it requires both not inciting, but also denouncing any of that violence, making sure that people are communicating with their supporters to keep calm, do the right thing. The secure voting is something that has already been discussed. Responsible oversight and trusted outcomes are two things that are also crucially important and probably define most what the press can do. And to us in this overtime period, one of the most important things I think for people to know is, number one, we're not going to know on election day who wins, right? And just knowing that the expectation that the election is over on Tuesday night is not a real expectation. And as we cover that, it's crucially important to know that this overtime period is coming. And then number two, I think it's crucially important to know that you don't have just an election irregularity or an election that is imperfect or something that happens that you heard. As we've observed elections across the world, every single time The stories of things that have gone wrong travel like wildfire. And the question is, how do we sort that out? And the answer, and this is why we're passing this baton here to Ben Ginsberg, the answer is we spend a lot of time in this overtime period sorting through what happened to make sure that the election still has credibility or not. That trusted outcome requires the rule of law, and it requires that we talk about and expose those election irregularities and then identify which ones are truly rise to the level of one that might impact the outcome of the election. So those are the types of principles that we've worked on in many, many democracies. We're excited to be here. Obviously, we care about this democracy enormously.